The House of the Dead games are an iconic piece of arcade history, but it was the first port into consoles in the mid to late 90s, which, alongside games like Virtual Cop and Time Crisis, gave me my first taster of the rail shooter genre. In today's review though, we're taking a look at Until the Last Bullet, a game which advertises itself as an unusual combination of FMV movie and rail shooter, and one which has you blasting away at the undead in an effort to save your childhood sweetheart. But is it any good? And is it worth your time and cash? Well, drop a like, subscribe for more Switch content, and let's find out. So let's kick things off with the story of this one then, and the story itself is presented to us as a combination of live action FMV, stock video footage, and static comic book style images, with the live action segments mostly filmed on scene and occasionally filmed against a green screen. Now, in the intro to the game, we find out that our protagonist is a young chap called Billy who loves to play video games, and that after an old man has his legs bitten to pieces by a dog, he mutates into a walking corpse, kicking off some sort of zombie apocalypse. After Billy's mother then sods off, he's left to fend for himself, and low on food, he's then forced to venture outside, where he meets up with childhood sweetheart Aria and a miserable old army veteran called Walter. But after Aria wanders off alone into an abandoned factory and doesn't come back, Billy gets a hero complex and decides to go look for her. Now, as you'd expect, it's all incredibly cheesy, and the quality of the acting is almost on par with the quality of the voice acting in the original House of the Dead games. That is to say, it's hilariously bad and definitely one of the most entertaining aspects of the game. Unfortunately though, that's about as deep as it gets with this one, and it's a bit of a shame really, as aside from the intro segment and a shocker of a twist at the end, there's really very little in the way of a storyline, and 90% of it is just Billy working his way through an abandoned factory. Now, when it comes to gameplay, the game can be played in either single player or cooperative 2-player modes, and having nobody to play with, I tackled it in single player of course, and on easy mode. After getting through an introductory cutscene where we witness Billy finding Aria's scarf, sniffing it like a pervert and heading into the factory to look for her, we're then straight into the action. And if you played the House of the Dead games, then be prepared to tail your expectations with this one, as rather than working your way through 3D landscapes killing 3D zombies, you're instead set against a static backdrop killing live action clips of zombies, and gameplay is definitely that of the shooter gallery genre rather than the on-rail shooter as described by the eShop listing. Admittedly, comparisons could be drawn at this point between this game and Pixar's Zombie Apocalypse, but I've actually put some effort into this game, creating all of their own assets, and I'm not about to insult the developer of Last Bullet by comparing him to those scummy asset flippers. The gameplay itself though is pretty simple stuff. It's your standard gallery style shooter, which has you controlling an on-screen cursor using either the left thumbstick or the controller's gyro function, and you simply need to kill all of the zombies without losing all of your health to complete each level. You begin the game with a pistol which holds 8 rounds and must be manually reloaded with the tap of the ZL button, and throughout the game you'll obtain additional weapons, including a submachine gun which Billy conveniently finds propped up against a wall, a couple of shotguns and an assault rifle which turns out to be a sniper rifle, and you're able to switch between weapons with the L and R buttons. Finally, in addition to these, you also have a knife attack, which you can actually spam in addition to shooting, which hits any on-screen enemy regardless of the distance, so it offers a decent boost in damage output, and you also have a grenade attack, which hits all on-screen enemies and slowly recharges over time. Now, while the gameplay is relatively enjoyable in a kind of take your mind off things and kill an hour or so kind of way, when it comes down to it, there's really not an awful lot of variety on offer in either the enemies or the environments. There are 3 main zombie types in the game, one being the melee enemies which will attack you once they reach you, the second ranged enemies who will throw rocks or Molotov cocktails at you, and finally the odd boss enemy which is indistinguishable from the others aside from the fact that it has a larger health bar. But you'll repeatedly encounter the same zombie types, and though there is a decent amount of variety to their animations and the placements are different depending on the environments, They all take the same number of hits to kill, so every zombie is practically the same. The entirety of the game also takes place within the factory, and though it does feature levels with multiple areas, there's barely any distinction between one area to the next. And unlike the House of the Dead, where you'll transition in-game from one location to the next, instead you get a 2-second cutscene and a short loading screen between areas. In an effort to add some variety, there are also a couple of levels which have enemies approaching you from different directions, requiring you to hit the B and A buttons to switch between them, and a singular level in which the screen is darkened and you're forced to use a flashlight. But the uniqueness of these levels is tainted by the fact that using the A and B buttons instead of the left and right buttons to turn isn't the most intuitive and just adds some additional button presses into the mix, further confusing your fingers. And the flashlight is just a mask effect which brightens everything around it, including the bright areas, and ultimately just obscures your vision. Now my final criticisms with this one concern its difficulty, because despite me playing on easy mode, I still had somewhat of a tough time with the game, and this really stems from a lack of consideration, or perhaps even effort put into its shooting mechanics. Rather than manually applying hitboxes to enemies, the developer has opted to make the enemy animations the hitboxes, which if you think about it kind of makes sense, but really doesn't translate well into gameplay due to some of them thrashing about wildly, so if you're even slightly off on your aim, you'll miss your shots and waste ammo. The appearance of enemies is also incredibly sporadic. Sometimes you'll be given plenty of notice with them lumbering in from the side of the screen, but other times they'll just appear out of nowhere and start beating the shit out of you, and you'll often take damage with no way to avoid it. Finally, it's also worth noting that there's no way to actually refill your health in the game, and with the enemies coming thick and fast, multiple areas to compete with, and the enemies in the last area requiring additional bullets to down, it can become pretty frustrating to get to the last area of a level and have to start over. So when all's said and done then, until the last bullet really isn't a terrible game, it's just not a very well thought out game. Its lack of variety, janky hitboxes and gameplay mechanics, and just the overall limitations presented by its 2D shooting gallery format mean that the amount of enjoyment you're likely to get out of playing this one will also be pretty limited. And while the humorous acting and the 2-player co-op mode may offer some amount of saving grace, they can only do so much. The moment-to-moment gameplay is entirely passable. It's playable and there's some amount of fun to be had with it, but it does become pretty repetitive. And the game itself is only 10 levels long, so it's pretty short, so in my opinion, it's best picked up on a heavy sale. With that though, are you a fan of the House of the Dead games, and have you considered giving this one a go? Let me know down in the comments section below, and if you've already played the game, let me know how you found it. For now though, drop a like and subscribe to the channel for more Nintendo Switch content, and until next time, take care of yourselves and game on.